Joining us now, Pentagon Press Secretary, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. Admiral Kirby, thanks for being with us again this morning. You can hear it in the voices of the Ukrainian military leaders and President Zelensky that they are very happy with the latest package of $800 million in weapons, up over $4 billion now from the United States into Ukraine and rising. What is your evaluation from the Pentagon point of view of what Russia is calling a new phase of this war, this new invasion of the East? What does it look like from your point of view?
What we're starting to see in these early days are kind of two things running in parallel, Willie. Number one, they're doing what we call shaping operations. They're continuing to move in enabling capabilities that will allow them to conduct larger offensive operations in the Donbass. So artillery support and helicopter, aviation, rotary aviation support, command and control elements, communication elements. But they're also at the same time also conducting limited offensive operations inside the Donbass, particularly in the northern part of the Donbass. If you look there, you'll see a town called Izium, which they had been advancing on now for a couple of weeks. And we see them now trying to move south and southeast of Izium and pushing more closely to where the Ukrainian forces are inside that the northern Donbass area. Now, the Ukrainians are pushing back. We're seeing them resist these efforts and going on the offense against these Russian attempts. So far, in these early days here of this new phase of the war, we haven't seen much territory in the Donbass really changing hands. They're pretty much still fighting over that same sort of line of contact, if you will. Now, in the south, as we've been talking about, they're still trying to take Mariupol. We don't believe that they have, in fact, taken Mariupol. And we believe that if they do, their intent is to dedicate the forces and the firepower that they have been applying in Mariupol, at least most of it, up into the Donbass, so that they will try to encircle the Ukrainian troops that are in the Donbass from the north and from the south.
So that's interesting. President Putin already has declared victory in Mariupol. We've seen footage of troops celebrating in the streets under the Russian flag. But that's not your assessment right now. How is Ukraine holding up if it is holding that city?
Well, we still have seen resistance inside Mariupol. Obviously, that resistance has been dwindling over time as the Russians have continued their onslaught. But we still see pockets of resistance inside Mariupol. And we also see, again, the Russians applying even more firepower. Most of the airstrikes that we're seeing in Ukraine are focused on Mariupol and to the north in the Donbass. But they have definitely still been pounding Mariupol.
What can you tell us, Admiral, about the failings of Russia's military and the challenges that they're even having now as they try to move into the Donbass?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. You saw that they announced a new general who's going to be sort of running the whole show now. It's clear that they are trying to learn from the mistakes that they made in the early days and weeks of this war. Command and control, unit cohesion, operational maneuver, trying to make sure they're maneuvering forces in a more efficient way. The integration of air and ground, which was deeply lacking in the first few days of the war, where air commanders weren't talking to ground commanders. They're trying to fix that. And you can begin to see the seeds of those efforts to improve their performance in these early days in the Donbass. For instance, as I was telling Willie, before they started moving in big maneuver forces, they started moving in command and control elements and helicopter support and logistics and sustainment. They didn't want to run out of supplies the way they did in the north. So clearly they are trying to learn from it. But there's a lot of challenges that they have to overcome. And this is not a military that's known for being very adaptive. It's not a military that's known for having leaders who are encouraged to take initiative and change the way they're doing things in the moment. So this is still going to be, we believe, a challenge for them.
So let's talk about nukes and nuclear blackmail. Early on, we heard Vladimir Putin talking about the possibility of World War III and nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons being employed in Ukraine. A bit more silence, because we also heard it, of course, from Russian diplomats and Russian TV. That talk quieted a bit. You had Lavrov last week, the foreign minister of Russia, saying, oh, no, we're not going to employ nuclear weapons. But now you have the disturbing spectacle of Russian state TV having open discussions about the nuking of New York City and Russia's ability to destroy everything in New York City in an instant. General Barry McCaffrey, I know a guy that you know and respect. General McCaffrey talked about just how reckless and irresponsible this was on Vladimir Putin's part to have his state-run television station talking about nuking American cities. How should we put all of that in context?
We absolutely agree with General McCaffrey. This is reckless and irresponsible rhetoric coming from a nuclear power, especially one that has the nuclear arsenal Mr. Putin does and has available to him. This is look, the war is already gone on longer than it should have. It should never even started. And to have a nuclear power exhibit that kind of bellicosity and be willing to talk about that, completely reprehensible. And now what I will tell you is that we're monitoring this as best we can every single day. And Secretary Austin gets updated every single day on what we're seeing from Russian nuclear capabilities and their posture. And I would just tell you, Joe, we take this very, very seriously. Our strategic deterrent posture for our homeland, as well as our deterrent posture with respect to allies and partners. And we've seen nothing to indicate that we need to change that posture, that we need to make any kind of nuclear capability changes to be able to defend the homeland or our allies and partners. So while the rhetoric is certainly troubling and irresponsible, we haven't seen anything that gives us cause to have to change our footprint.
So, as disturbed as I was by the former president seeming to move away at times from the importance of defending fellow NATO countries under attack, I've been cheered by this president, the current commander-in-chief, President Biden, saying that the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory. That I know means an awful lot, especially to those in the Balkan states. I am curious, though, where Moldova fits in the Pentagon and the White House's thinking. Obviously, Vladimir Putin and other Russians talking about the possibility of moving on Moldova. If they did that, what would the United States and NATO's response be?
Yeah, look, very worrisome to hear that kind of rhetoric. You have to keep it in somewhat perspective. They haven't really achieved any of their strategic objectives in Ukraine, quite frankly. But that doesn't mean, we don't take it seriously. So obviously, that's very concerning to us. We're keeping an eye on that. I wouldn't get ahead of operational decisions or policy decisions by the commander-in-chief, by President Biden. I would just tell you that we are, in fact, committed to every inch of NATO territory and making sure that that's defensible. In fact, over the last several weeks, we've gone from about 80,000 American troops in Europe to 100,000. And we are actively talking with allies and partners about what that posture ought to look like going forward. Because, Joe, to your point, the larger issue is here that the security environment in Europe has changed. Not is changing, it has changed. And we don't know exactly what that's going to look like going forward, but we know we've got to posture ourselves differently for a new environment on the European continent. So we're actively talking to allies and partners about what that needs to look like.
Admiral, I have two questions for you. They're very different. The first is, I understand you've been sanctioned by Russia, along with David Ignatius and our friend Biana. I believe it was Ned Price who was saying that's actually a sign of weakness to an extent, that the strategy keeps changing and this sort of lashing out. How do you see that beyond it being kind of a badge of honor at this point?
Yeah, it's a pretty good group to belong to. I mean, I think if you look, he also sanctioned a bunch of journalists as well. You mentioned David and others. Nobody called to tell me that I was being sanctioned or why, but if you just take a look at some of the people on that list, it's clear that information bothers Mr. Putin. He doesn't want to have to deal with the truth and people that are telling the truth. Journalists on the ground, writers like David, me and Ned from the podium, being honest and open about what we're seeing the Russian forces do inside Ukraine. Clearly, he wants to shut down the free flow of information, and I think part of the sanctions are an effort to demonstrate that, and that is a sign of weakness. I mean, that's what tyrants do and dictators do, just try to siphon off the truth from their people and lie to them.
So the second question I have is about Mariupol and the people who are still in that steel plant, along with troops, Ukrainian troops. And is there, I know you probably get asked this 1,000 times a day, but there's no way to help these people? Will they die there? Is there a way to create Ukrainian humanitarian zone, Ukrainian-led no-fly zones? Isn't there a way to keep it still within Ukraine, but somehow help those people?
Look, we're just as bothered and concerned and devastated by the images that we're seeing coming out of Mariupol and other places in Ukraine. Nobody here at the Pentagon has taken this lightly. We know that there's real lives here at stake and real lives lost, and that's why we're working so hard to give Ukraine the tools they need to defend themselves in Mariupol and elsewhere in the country. And the kinds of things that we're sending them now, just over what you saw yesterday, are things that we believe and that they believe because they've told us will actually help them beat back the Russian aggression in places like Mariupol and the Donbass. That's our focus right now, is making sure they can defend themselves as ably and as quickly as possible.
Admiral, we spoke on this show about 2 months ago at the dawn of the Russian invasion, and I asked you whether or not there's a chance that American troops would ever be on the ground in Ukraine, and you were very clear. You said the president has made this clear: there will not be American troops on the ground. Has anything in the last 2 months changed that for you? Have any of the horrors that we've witnessed either in Mariupol or Bucha changed your calculus at all? Is there a chance American troops could be in Ukraine?
The president has still been very clear, and he's been asked about this even recently. There will be no U.S. forces fighting in Ukraine, fighting in this war. And I think, back to the conversation I was just having with Joe about nuclear capabilities, I think we can all understand that escalating the war and making it about the United States versus Russia, two nuclear powers, that could lead to dangers well beyond Ukraine. It's certainly an escalation of the conflict between the United States and Russia would not be good for Ukraine, not be good for the Ukrainian people, not be good for these Ukrainian cities and towns. It absolutely would not be good for the European continent or even for our own national security. So it's a tough place to be. But the president is right. I mean, we have to be mindful of the possibility that a much broader, deeper, even global war could result from that kind of outcome.